Good morning, welcome back. We're here today on June 27th, once again, back out on the flower-bestrewn deck, the even more flower-bestrewn deck. And funny thing, you know the plants are starting to win when the humans, like me, have to battle other plants, like the strawberry plant, for space on the table. In fact, if you look very closely right here, you'll see there's a strawberry growing on the strawberry plant. So that's, but we just soldier on and move on to talk about what happened on this date in history. On this date in 1743, during the War of Austrian Succession, the Battle of Dettingen took place. The Battle of Dettingen. Now this is, for the most of us, a forgotten battle and a forgotten war, except for the fact that King George II led troops into battle. Now for those of you who don't know, King George II, of course, is the father of King George III, who would have been who would have been the King of England during the American War for Independence. If you don't know him from that, you might remember him as being the guy in Hamilton who came out and sang a couple of songs during that show. But King George II led his troops into battle on this date in 1743, and that is the last time that an English king led his troops actually in battle on this date. In 1778, speaking of the American Revolution, the Liberty Bell returned to Philadelphia from wherever it was taken when the British invaded the city. Once the British left, then the Liberty Bell was returned, and it is still there. We saw it a few years ago, and I know that my son saw it through a window just over a couple months ago. So it's still there in Philadelphia in case you're looking for the Liberty Bell. On this date in 1905, Russian soldiers on the battleship Potemkin mutinied. Now this is an interesting story because it was supposed to be a much larger event. I mean, they were planning that they were going to have a mutiny across the entire fleet. This was during the Tsarist days, the Romanovs and all of that. However, due to some inedible meat, the actual mutiny took place a little sooner than they were expecting. They were able to take over the Potemkin, the ship the Potemkin, and then a couple of other ships joined them. They ended up going over to Odessa, where they put a body on the stairs, and there was kind of a sympathy strike going on there. But then the Tsar's troops settled in, and ultimately this particular mutiny failed, although it was only a short dozen years later that the Tsar actually was overthrown. Incidentally, this event was memorialized in a film made by the Soviet Union in 1925 called, not surprisingly, The Battleship Potemkin. It's a silent movie, but it's generally considered to be one of the 100 greatest films ever made. Film Survey in 1958 listed it as the greatest, and much later, I don't know, it's kind of dropped a bit, but it's generally considered one of the classic war movies from the 1920s. Again, it's a silent film made by the Soviet Union. And I believe it's available on YouTube if you're interested. In 1942, the FBI captured 8 Nazi saboteurs who had essentially invaded the U.S. from a submarine. I just remember this story from reading about it when I was a kid, reading stories about the FBI, and this was one of their great successes. Speaking of great successes, in 1955, the first auto seatbelt law was put into place. The first auto seatbelt law in what state was that? You got it, Illinois. 1955. All right, well, today in 1880 is Helen Keller's birthday. Helen Keller was the first deaf-blind person to graduate from college. Got a Bachelor of Arts degree and became a very famous disability advocate, wrote autobiography. Very famous, lived quite some time, died in 1968, so she would have been 88 years old when she died in the late 1960s. In 1888, just 8 years after Helen Keller was born, Antoinette Perry was born. Now, Antoinette Perry was an American actress and leader of, like a union leader for American actresses, and when she died in 1946, leader amongst American actors and actresses, when she died in 1946, a short time later, they were looking to create an award for excellence in theater, and they decided to name the award after her, the Antoinette Perry Award. or as most of us generally refer to it as the Tony Award, named after Antoinette Perry, who was born in the state in 1888. In 1844, Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, died in Nauvoo, Illinois from a fall from a prison in that city. I've been there. I've been to this particular prison. One of the many pictures that my lovely and talented assistant has taken of me inside a prison cell comes from this particular prison. You can go see it. It's kind of it's a historical site maintained by the Mormon Church. It's kind of an interesting thing to see. It's in Nauvoo, Illinois, which is along the western border of the state, somewhat south of Galesburg, I believe. It's about 150 miles or so from the Chicago area. But he died on this date in 1844. And finally, on this date in 1933, hymn writer James Mountain died. James Mountain. Most of us probably don't know who James Mountain is, but you've probably heard his songs because he's the guy that wrote the song, "Like a river glorious is God's perfect peace, over all victorious in its bright increase. Perfect yet it floweth." I could go on and sing the whole song, but I want you to stay around, so I'm not going to do that. All right. Well, today we're going to get back into talking about Isaiah, and I hope we're going to make a lot of progress. We're going to get through several chapters here today. And so because we're going to be moving fast, I advise you, this is being filmed in the state of Illinois, so buckle up and we'll get going on that. Good morning. Welcome back. We are here to talk about Isaiah. We're going to finish up, or we're going to continue our discussion with the end of chapter 14. Quick review. Isaiah 1 through 5, indictment of the nation. Isaiah 6, Isaiah's commission. Isaiah 7 through 9, test of Ahaz. Isaiah 10 through chapter 35 are actually a discussion of various oracles, judgments, pronouncements, sometimes predictions about what's going to happen to a variety of countries. And we mentioned this last week, that these particular oracles are not necessarily ones that had been delivered to these countries. These are for the benefit of the Israelites, those who are in this trying time where, again, Isaiah's in the southern kingdom, Judah, where the northern kingdom is under great stress and ultimately will fall. And of course, this is not in line with their thinking of what God's plan was going to be. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today as we go through these different oracles. And God lists out a series of oracles, a series of pronouncements about these other nations that all kind of surround the nation of Israel. Okay. I thought about trying to throw a map on here, but I decided against that. But again, we've got Israel, you've got the Mediterranean is on the east side of Israel. Their western, the western beach is the eastern edge of the Mediterranean. And then to the north, you have Syria, and then further out, you have Assyria, like generally around the area where Iraq is today. And then you've got some other countries that we're going to talk about a little bit today. Okay, so last week we talked about Babylon. We talked about the great king of Babylon and the pronouncement against him and what's going to happen to him and how he thought he was going to be so great, and it just fell to pieces. Okay, and so it was kind of interesting. You had that four-part. We had the view from heaven. We had the view from the ground, just that sense of relief. Then you had the view from death, where from Sheol, the grave, where they say, wow, hey, you're dead, you're here with us. And you had the view from heaven. It's like, wow, you thought you were going to ascend up this high. And then finally that view from earth, where it's just, wow, you're not even getting the proper burial. You're not nearly what we thought you were going to be. Okay, and so this pronouncement on this king of Babylon. Okay, now we're continuing this idea. We're continuing these series of pronouncements that Isaiah is providing for the nation of Israel, and again, these are put in kind of a thematic order, not necessarily chronological. So we don't know exactly when that Isaiah said any one of these particular things or when he wrote them down. We just know that they're put together to kind of give this overall impression. And I think the overall impression, the overall message that he's trying to make is that, you know what, God is a God who keeps his promises. That, yeah, it doesn't look like what you thought it was going to look like. And, this is kind of a theme throughout the Bible. And we're going to mention this later on. That it's kind of a theme throughout the Bible that, an assumption is made and then the people get upset because it's not what they thought it was going to be, and God has to step in and go, no, that's not what I intended. Okay. Really, if you get into it, I think the whole Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, again, this is a rabbit trail. I think the whole Sermon on the Mount, I think the theme of the Sermon on the Mount, and someday I'm going to do Matthew, and when I do, I'm going to talk about the Sermon on the Mount. I'm going to say the whole theme of the Sermon on the Mount is it's not what you think. Okay, it's not what you think. That's, to me, the theme of the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, that has little to do with Isaiah, so let's get back to Isaiah. Sorry, I had to say that. Okay, so we're in Isaiah chapter 14, okay, and so we finished up the section on Babylon, and now the Lord is getting back, the Lord through Isaiah is getting back to Assyria, okay. So Assyria, beginning in chapter 14, verse 24, the Lord of hosts has sworn, and I'm going to read 24 through 27 because there's an interesting idea here that I want to touch on. The Lord of hosts has sworn, as I have planned, so shall it be. And as I have purposed, so shall it stand. That I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountains trample him underfoot. And his yoke shall depart from them, and his burden from their shoulder. This is the purpose that is purposed concerning the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out over all the nations. For the Lord of hosts has purposed, and who will annul it? His hand is stretched out, and who will turn it back? Okay. Interesting thought here. He's talking about the Assyria. Okay, so those reading it, if they read it at the time of Isaiah's life, they would have thought, wait a minute, Babylon is not a nice city, but it's not nowhere near the dominant. Assyria is the dominant one. And so the Lord is kind of coming back through Isaiah and he's saying, wait a minute, I haven't forgotten these guys because it's part of my purpose, And as I have planned, so shall it be, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand. Okay, so this is really, kind of an interesting view, and I don't want to say predestination because that's not quite the right word here, but God's plan originally, as the Jews and the Israelites understood it, was that the Israelite nation would be God's nation. They would be His representatives to the world. Okay, so there was always this element where the Israelite nation was never meant to close its walls. Okay, was never meant to circle the wagons and not let anybody in. Okay, the Israelite nation was always supposed to be God's witness to the world. Okay, and you can go through, and I'm not going to take the time to do it now, but that was the intent. So God didn't choose Israel because they were an amazing bunch of people. Okay, now again, I mean no disrespect to anyone who happens to be Jewish, but we know from some New Testament references that Abram at the time, we're talking about Genesis 12, was an idol worshiper. Okay, but God chose him and his family and said, listen, I'm going to choose you, and you're going to be the one to do this. Now, interesting thought. It's just, again, I'm bordering into speculation here. Genesis 12, Abram is chosen to be the representative. We don't know that God didn't come to others and say, hey, I want you to be, and they just said no. Abram was the one who said yes, and so he's the one we remember. Okay. Again, you cannot go to the text and show that God picked Abram and he was the only one. It could be just kind of an interesting idea that Abram was chosen. Several others were given the opportunity, and Abram was the one who said yes. Abram was the one who just responded. But whatever. Part of God's plan was that Israel, the family of Abram becomes Abraham. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob's name is changed to Israel. Israel has 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, this is all in Genesis, 12 through 50. You can, or
yeah, 12 through 50. You can kind of follow that story. Okay, but at the time that Isaiah is writing, at the time that Isaiah is ministering, things are not going according to the plan. Okay, so for example, the people of Israel at the time would have said, hey, hey, we're supposed to be your people. Why is Assyria such a pain? Okay, why are they so powerful? Okay, and the Lord is telling them here. It's like, hey, my purpose, don't worry about my purpose. My purpose has, as I have planned it, so shall it be. And again, as I have planned it, okay, God is saying, as I have planned it, so shall it be. Not how there's not a we here. This is not a collaborative thing between Israel and God. God is saying, listen, I've got a plan, and it's going to happen, whether you guys like it or not. And what the Israelite nation has done is what we do so many times is we get partial information of something and that we want to happen, and we extrapolate from that, and we assume, well, if this is true, then this must be true. Okay, without bothering to kind of go, okay, what do we know? What can we definitely say? You see, we do this. In fact, like if you think about it, just about every rom-com ever made is based on this sort of idea. The idea that somebody gets partial information and draws the wrong conclusion from it, and hilarity ensues. That's what a rom-com is. Okay, without bothering to ask the next question or the next level. Recently there was a movie made, a movie of Emma, okay, starring Anya Taylor-Joy, who was in The Queen's Gambit. Okay, so Emma is a Jane Austen novel, and I love Jane Austen. Okay, I am a Janeite. I love Jane Austen. I've read all of Jane Austen's novels. Okay, so again, I'm proud to say I'm a Janeite. Okay, but there's a scene in Emma, which many consider to be her greatest novel. I don't particularly. I'm partial to Pride and Prejudice or Sense and Sensibility, but that's a side note. Let's get back to the point. There's a scene in Emma where Emma is sitting on a couch with her friend Harriet, and they're talking about Harriet's dreams and aspirations. And Harriet says something to the effect of, oh, there's a guy I really like. And Emma says, wait, don't tell me who it is. I don't want to know. I'm not going to ask. But Emma thinks it's one person. And you don't realize it at the time you're reading it if you've never read it through the book. But they're talking about two different people. Okay, so Harriet says, I'm in love with this guy, and Emma immediately leaps to the conclusion that the person Harriet is in love with is someone else. So again, she gets partial information and just leaps to the conclusion. And so the Israelites do kind of the same thing. They get partial information, what the Lord has told them, and they assume that, well, if this is true, then this must be true. And yet you still have this situation of, well, why is Israel fallen? Why did we split? Why is Israel fallen? Why is Assyria so strong? And the Lord is like, you know what? As I have purpose, so shall it be. I'm not worried. Kind of thing. I don't know if you've ever driven in a car with somebody and, you're driving along, and maybe this is a male thing. You're driving along and you know where you are and you know where you're going and you know how to get there. But the person who is with you doesn't. And so he or she starts asking questions. Do you know where we're going? What about here? What about just kind of, I know where I'm going. We're going to get there. Don't worry, we're going to get there, kind of thing. And here this God is saying, listen, I've purposed it that I haven't forgotten you, but my view of what you're going to be is different than what you think it's going to be. Okay, and you have to go through the whole New Testament to kind of develop that thought. But if you were going to do a theology of God's predetermined will, so to speak, what is it that the Lord causes to happen, or theology of events? Why do things occur? Okay, you're going to have to come back to this passage. You're going to say, well, could the Lord say here, as it will be. Okay. So again, it's just sort of a thought here. His hand is stretched out, and who will turn it back? Okay. So the Lord is saying, listen, don't worry about Assyria. I'm gonna take care of Assyria. They're gonna get theirs, and ultimately they did. Okay. Verse 28. In the year that King Ahaz died, came this oracle. Okay. Now, interesting thought. In the year that King Ahaz died. Does that sound familiar? Well, yeah, that's kind of the way Isaiah 6 starts. In the year that King Uzziah died. Okay, so this is just giving a date marker to the original readers. So they would have known, they would have understood the significance of this. Now, unfortunately, this is something that's kind of lost because we can't really, and by we I mean, historians and Bible scholars and things, cannot really nail down the exact year that King Ahaz died. Okay, so there are some who say it was 727, some say 715, some say 701. Okay, again, it's BC, so the numbers go backwards. We don't really know the actual year that King Ahaz died, but even still, it's just a point that the original readers would have got, and this is just a way of introducing this oracle about the country of, or the nation of, or the people group of Philistia. Okay. In the year that King Ahaz died came this oracle. Okay, so I'm in verses 29 through 32 of chapter 14. Rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you, that the rod that struck you is broken. For from the servant's root will come forth an adder, and its fruit will be a flying fiery serpent. And the firstborn of the poor will graze, and the needy lie down in safety. But I will kill your root with famine, and your remnant it will slay. Wail, O gate, cry out, O city. Melt in fear, O Philistia, all of you, for smoke comes out of the north, and there is no straggler in his ranks. What will one answer the messengers of the nation? The Lord has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people find refuge. Okay, so here at the end here is that the Lord has founded Zion. Okay, Zion is often used as a phrase that is often used as a substitute for Israel, God's people, Zion. Okay, so Philistia, where is Philistia? Okay, so if you understand the nation of Israel, and you've got the at the top, you've got the Sea of Galilee, and then there's the Jordan River, and then you've got the Dead Sea, and Jerusalem is just over here, a little bit off of the Dead Sea, and to the west, kind of southwest along the border of the Mediterranean is where Philistia is. In fact, if you think in current geography, if you think of where the Gaza Strip is nowadays, you're in the general area. Okay, the borders are not exact, but that general area. So it was on the lower southwest side of Jerusalem is where Philistia was. Okay, and so. And who are the Philistines? Okay, so again, these are a people group that has been a thorn in the side of Israel for quite some time. In fact, the word Philistia or the Philistines, when they translated it into Latin and all of that, and the corruption and et cetera, nowadays when we talk about Palestine, when we talk about the area known as Palestine, that is actually a derivative that comes from the word Philistine. Okay, so that's that word, the land of the Philistines, Palestine. Okay, so that something interesting. That's free. There, it might be on your test. I don't know, but still. So the Philistines. So now the Lord is going to give an oracle about the Philistines because these guys have been a thorn in the side of Israel for a long time. Okay, and David and Goliath. Goliath was from Philistine. Who was a Philistine? He was from Philistia. Okay, and there's all kinds of stories in Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles about them. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but the Lord wants to make sure. Okay, so because they are bordering Israel, and so we want to make sure we cover all of these states that are bordering Israel. Okay. Rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you, that the rod that struck you is broken. Okay. Now, is this talking about Ahaz? Probably not. Okay. Now, it could be. Again, it's probably not, simply because Ahaz didn't cause a lot of grief to the Philistines. Okay. And this is just going from the biblical record, again, in Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles are 3 books in the Old Testament that kind of summarize the story for a number of reasons, in a number of ways, of the kingdom era of Israel. Okay, starting with Samuel, Kings and Chronicles kind of overlap a lot. Kings has a tendency to be more political. Chronicles has a tendency to be more focused on the temple. Okay, but there is a lot of overlap between Kings and Chronicles. Okay, but still, these talk about these historical moments. Okay, so let's see, where was I? That the rod of structure is broken. Okay, now one idea is that Ahaz died the same year that an Assyrian ruler died, and I think it's Tiglath-Pileser, who was one of the great Assyrian rulers, died the same year as Ahaz, and so that's what the author is talking about. Could be. We don't really know. See, that's the thing. It's a little up in the air. The original readers, the original recipients of this would have understood what he was talking about. He's probably not talking about Judah. Okay, Judah as being a threat at the time, because at the time they weren't. Okay, but he's saying that here's what's going to happen. And the firstborn from the serpent's paw will come forth an adder, and its fruit will be a flying fiery serpent, and the firstborn of the poor will graze. Okay, and the needy lie down in safety. So that your destruction is such that your leadership will be eliminated, and those who are stressed, the firstborn of the poor, okay, the firstborn of the poor will lie down in safety, will graze, and the needy lie down in safety. Okay, but I will kill your root with famine, and your remnant it will slay. Wail, O gate! Cry out, O city! Melt in fear, O Philistia, all of you. Say, wail, O gate! Why would he say gate? Okay, well, within this era, when Israel and Philistia was a bona fide city state, 1000 BC, somewhere in that area, you would have a city, and then the gate was where the leadership would sit. Okay, so that would be so when we talk about the gate of a city, when the gate says this, that's kind of, well, the leadership says this. Kind of like the same way we talk about, well, an announcement came from City Hall that said this, or Village Hall, or even so much like here you live in Illinois, you say, well, I heard Springfield said this. Or in the U.S., you can say, oh, the U.S., Washington says this. Okay, so again, this is just these ideas that this central area that's used to represent the whole country. Okay, what will one answer? Wail, O gate, cry out, for smoke comes out of the north, and there is no straggler in his ranks. Okay, now again, this is not probably talking about Judah, because Judah would have attacked from the west. Now, again, there's a point where they could come in from the north, but Judah had this huge northern border, or border that goes this way, and they would have come from the west. Why would they go to all the trouble to come up around to the north? Okay, it's like if you were going to mount an invasion, if the U.S. were going to mount an invasion of Canada, or if Canada were going to mount an invasion of the U.S. So Canada mounts an invasion of the U.S. and they invaded through Florida. Okay, you would think, well, wait a minute, why would you do that? You've got this whole unprotected border. Why would you pick Florida? Why would you go all the trouble? That's kind of the idea. So Judah would have come from the west, not from the north, which suggests that whatever it is that's going to destroy Philistia, the land of the Philistines, is not Judah, it's someone else. And again, this is consistent with what Isaiah has been talking about earlier, that all of these other countries are doing the bidding of God. Okay, let's move on. Chapter 15. Now, this is kind of interesting because there's a little bit of a shift here. Again, when we talk about Assyria and we talk about Philistia, and even for Babylon, there's no sympathy given. Okay, there's no like camaraderie or anything like that. Whereas in chapter 15, we're going to start talking about a judgment on Moab. Okay, and Moab has a little different flavor to it. Okay, so an oracle concerning Moab. Okay, now who is Moab? Where is Moab? Okay, so physically or geographically, Moab is a small area, about 30 miles by 30 miles, just on the east side of the Dead Sea. So again, the southern part, Judah, it borders the Dead Sea on its western border. That is the Dead Sea's western border. So between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean, that's kind of where Judah is located. On the other side of the Dead Sea, a small area, 30 miles by about 30 miles, is the people group, the nation of Moab. And again, keep in mind in this time period that the borders are not nearly as strict as they are today. Not that they're strict today, but again, they're just sort of kind of very fluid, very porous at the time. Okay, so who are the Moabites? Well, if you know your Bible, you know Genesis 19, that you've got the story of Lot. Lot goes to Sodom and Gomorrah, and we've talked about Sodom and Gomorrah before. And what happens is, and again, this is one of the sad stories of Genesis, that Lot escapes with his two unmarried daughters. They get him in a cave, they get him drunk, and one of the daughters, and they both get him drunk, they both sleep with their father, and one of them becomes the father of the Ammonites, and the other one becomes the father of the Moabites. Okay, so these guys, the Moabites, are distant relations of the Jews of Israel. Okay, so Abram's nephew is Lot. Okay, his brother Laban, I think, is his. No, that's a different. Well, whatever. So Abram's nephew is Lot. Okay, so Lot's descendants are Abram's relatives. Okay, so there is a relationship between these two countries. There's like a kinship between these two countries. There's a kinship just in geographic. They're close, but also they have very similar language. The Moabite language is very similar to the Hebrew that the Jews would have spoken at the time. So there's a very close connection. And if you follow the story of Ruth, it seems that they were very lax or very open in terms of letting people come back and forth from Israel into Moab, Moab into Israel. Okay, so it was a country that was a distant relation to Israel. Okay, not just a country that they fought against. Okay, but it's interesting here. So because Er of Moab is laid, I'm in chapter 15, beginning with verse 1. An oracle concerning Moab. Because Er of Moab is laid waste in a night, Moab is undone. Because Kir of Moab is laid waste in a night, Moab is undone. So again, talking just about these cities that Moab is going to be destroyed. Okay. He, that is Moab in general, has gone up to the temple and to Dibon, to the high places, to weep over Nebo and over Medeba. Moab wails. Nebo, again, Exodus, there's a reference to Mount Nebo. This is the area where Moses was said, go up to the mountain and you can look over and see the promised land. It was done from Nebo. Okay. On every head is baldness, every beard is shorn. Okay, again, this is something that was a great dishonor at the time, and this is just showing the level of devastation that's going to happen to Moab. In the streets they wear sackcloth, on the housetops and in the squares. Everyone wails and melts in tears. Heshbon and Elilah cry out. Their voice is heard as far as Jahaz. Therefore the armed men of Moab cry aloud. His soul trembles. Okay. Now here's the thing. Now this is where it kind of gets personal, beginning with verse 5, talking about what's going to happen here to them. Where am I? Verse 5. My heart cries out for Moab. Her fugitives flee to Zoar, to Eglath, Shalishiah. For at the ascent of Luhith they go weeping. On the road to Horonaim they raise a cry of destruction. Okay, so people are escaping out of Moab because of the destruction that's happening here. Okay, her fugitives. Okay, so Isaiah is saying, my heart cries out for these people because these are our people. These are our relatives. They're distant, yes, but they're of us. Okay, we are all related to, I guess, Terah, Abraham's father. Terah. They would all be related to Terah, Abraham's father. But we're all related, and my heart goes out for these guys. This devastation, the fugitives who are fleeing. Okay, so these refugees are on the road, and Isaiah says, my heart cries out for these people. Okay, it's kind of interesting that this is Isaiah's reaction to this. And again, let me make a side note here. Okay. Talking about, you start thinking about this thing. Isaiah is looking at these refugees, look at these people leaving, look at these people escaping, looking for safety out of their country. In the U.S., many of us saw pictures where especially in 2018, I remember this was a couple of years ago, that there was a series of caravans coming from Central America. Okay, refugees. Okay, and maybe some of you saw pictures that look like this. I'm going to try and hopefully I'm going to be able to plug in a couple pictures here. That these caravans of people carrying kids and coming up to try and get out of the situation that was happening in Honduras. And it could be, and it hasn't gotten much better. It could be because of the drug wars. It could be because of the economic issues. It could have been because of the hurricanes that went through. But we had all of these caravans going through, and it's interesting. Did the U.S. evangelical community say, like, Isaiah, my heart cries out for these people? Well, again, don't think about it too much, because the answer is an overwhelming no. Okay, a Pew Research Center poll taken in July of 2018 about this particular example. What do you think we should do with this? So they asked people, and people who identified as evangelicals said, 68% of them said that America has no responsibility to house refugees. None. No, 68% of evangelicals have no responsibility. Now that is 25% above the national average. So on average, 30, what is that? Let's see. So that's 36%? No, 3%. 43%. 43% of Americans in general say America has no responsibility to house refugees. Okay. And 68% of white evangelicals said that. Okay. Now here's the thing. If you want to take that position, that's fine. Okay. Again, it's a free country. Do what you want. Okay. But if you're going to take that position, that America has, that the U.S., our country, the one that we have avoided, and again, I'm speaking to people that live in the U.S. So if you're watching this and don't live in the U.S., this doesn't apply to you quite as directly. Okay. But if you live in the U.S., the country that we have a voice in, that we have a way of influencing the political direction of the country, if you want to believe that, that's fine. Knock yourself out. You absolutely, positively have the right. And there are very good reasons, logical reasons that can be made as to why that is accurate. But don't identify yourself as an evangelical, somebody who supposedly believes in the importance of Scripture. Okay? Because again, you cannot look at this passage, my heart cries out for Moab, here fugitives flee to Zoar. Okay, so Isaiah is saying, my heart cries out for these fleeing fugitives. Okay, what was this caravan? Okay, these were fleeing fugitives. These are people that for one reason or another couldn't remain living in Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua. Okay, so again, I'm going to get off that soapbox here a little bit, and let's go back to talking about Moab. Okay, again, these were their people. Okay, and there are people. Okay, many of these people are believers that are coming, and okay, I'm sorry. I said I was going to get back. Let me get back to talking about this. Okay, verse 6, the waters of Nimron are a desolation. The grass is withered. The vegetation fails. The greenery is no more. Interesting idea. We're going to come back to that idea of grass is withered in chapter 40. The grass withers, the flower fades, etc., etc. Therefore, the abundance they have gained and what they have laid up, they carry away over the brook of willows. For a cry has gone around the land of Moab. Her wailing reaches to Eglaim. Her wailing reaches to Beer Eliam. Okay. For the waters of Dibon are full of blood. For I will bring upon Dibon even more, a lion for those of Moab who escape, for the remnant of the land. And the Lord is talking about what's happening to these people. A lion for those of Moab who escape, for the remnant of the land. It's kind of interesting. So what are they talking about? A lion? It's like, so it's kind of like out of the frying pan into the fire. There's a passage in Amos chapter 5, beginning with verse 18 in the NIV, says, why do you long for the day of the Lord? Okay. Because some people, just for the day of the Lord. Remember, we mentioned earlier that the day of the Lord usually indicates some sort of serious judgment. Okay, why do you long for the day of the Lord? That day will be darkness, not light. It will be as though a man fled from a lion only to meet a bear, as though he entered his house and rested his hand on the wall only to have a snake bite him. Okay, so this is again, it's you escape a lion to meet a bear, escape a bear to meet a lion, and I think that's kind of what is happening here. Even though Isaiah's like, my heart goes out to these people, yet this is what's happening to them. Chapter 16 here. Send the lamb to the ruler of the land from Selah by way of the desert to the mountain of the daughter of Zion. Okay. This is a tricky passage. Send the lamb to the ruler of the land. Not quite sure what that means. Okay, it's a weird construction. It's not used anywhere else in the Old Testament. Generally, it's believed to mean some sort of obeisance, some sort of submission to the ruler of the land that you're trying to enter. Okay, like fleeing birds, like a scattered nest, so are the daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon. Okay, talking about this water location again. That the devastation that's going to happen to Moab is such that they're going to be fleeing. And again, this is causing grief to Isaiah. Like, my heart goes out to these guys, but still. And in verse 3. So this particular passage here, chapter 16. This is kind of a response. I mean, Moab, what's going to happen to Moab? And Isaiah is saying, here, guys, here's what you should do. In chapter 3, chapter 16, beginning with verse 3, give counsel, grant justice, make your shadow like night at the height of the noon. Shelter the outcasts, do not reveal the fugitive. Let the outcasts of Moab sojourn among you. Okay, again, go back to our discussion about those caravans. Okay, now, again, America's a big town. I'm not saying that every one of us has to open our doors and let a fugitive in. Okay, maybe you should. Okay, I don't know what your situation is. Okay, but America is a pretty large country. The U.S. is a pretty large country. We have a lot of resources. Okay, and certainly as the people of God, we could have been more representative of what Isaiah is saying here in Isaiah 15 and 16. Be a shelter to them from the destroyer, where the oppressor is no more and destruction is ceased, and he who tramples underfoot has vanished from the land. Okay, do this for them. Be this for these oppressed people. Okay, and remember, in Isaiah chapter 1, the four: learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. Okay, those four things that just keep coming back over and over and over again throughout Isaiah. But then he says, what is the ultimate hope? And again, I get this. What is the ultimate hope? Then a throne will be established in steadfast love, and on it will sit in faithfulness in the tent of David. One who judges and seeks justice and is swift to do righteousness. So the ultimate solution here, the ultimate solution for Moab is the same ultimate solution for Israel, which is the same ultimate solution for the U.S. The return of the Davidic kingdom, the return of the Lord. Okay, that there's going to be a king someday who will bring justice to all. Okay, now here's the thing. Yeah, we're not there yet. We're not at that point. Okay, but it's not up to us to sit there and go, well, I'll just wait till the Lord returns. In the meantime, I'm not going to do anything about it. Okay, yeah, I don't think that's an option. Okay. We have heard verse 6, we have heard of the pride of Moab, how proud he is, of his arrogance, his pride, and his insolence. In his idle boasting he is not right. Therefore let Moab wail for Moab. Let everyone wail, mourn, utterly stricken for the raisin cakes of Kir Haresheth. Okay? For the fields of Heshbon languish, and the vine of Sibmah. The Lord of the nations have struck down its branches, which reached to Jazer, and reached to the desert, and straight to the desert. Its shoots spread abroad, and passed over the sea. Okay, therefore, so again, Moab deserves what it's getting. Don't get me wrong. Okay, so Moab deserves this: the leadership, the people who are involved in whatever idolatrous teaching they were doing. So Moab deserves this. Okay, so they're not getting away with something. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be compassionate. Okay, because then here. Verse 9, therefore I weep with the weeping of Jazer for the vine of Zimmah. I drench you with my tears. O Heshbon and Elealeh. For over your summer fruit and your harvest the shout has ceased, and joy and gladness are taken away from the fruitful field. And in the vineyard no songs are sung, no cheers are raised. This is interesting. This is the Lord saying, this is not something that's making me happy. Okay, this is not bringing joy to my life. Okay, but this is just something that their sin has led them into. No treader treads out wine in the press. I put an end to the shouting. Therefore, verse 11, therefore my inner parts, this is chapter 16, verse 11, therefore my inner parts moan like a lyre for Moab. Lyre, L-Y-R-E, this is an instrument, okay? And my inmost for Kir Hareseth. Therefore my inner parts shall moan. Okay, so another way to translate this is my bowels moan. Okay, so kind of talking about this is what this is doing to Isaiah, and this is what it's doing to the Lord. It's like, I have to do this. This is hurting me more than it's hurting you, that kind of thing. Like, this is not bringing me pleasure. Okay, but you're the guys and you're getting what you deserve. And we, or the Jews at the time, are still under the obligation to be witnesses, to be salt and light to their brothers. And when Moab presents himself, when he wearies himself on the high place, when he comes to his sanctuary to pray, he will not prevail. This is the word that the Lord spoke concerning Moab in the past. But now the Lord has spoken, saying, in 3 years, like the years of a hired worker, the glory of Moab will be brought into contempt, in spite of all his great multitude, and those who remain will be very few and feeble. Okay, so continuing on this idea, Moab is a country that was kind of close, physically, emotionally, relationally, to Israel. Okay, and they had their issues. Okay, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're innocent or anything. Okay, the Lord is saying, listen, I've got to judge you. It's not bringing me pleasure, but He weeps for them. Okay, so the message to the people that are reading it, what is the message to the people who are reading this? This is kind of an interesting idea, because on the one hand, you would think that they would be reading this thinking, oh yeah, our enemies are getting theirs, our enemies are getting theirs, and God is saying, yeah, they're going to be punished, but this is breaking my heart, and it should break yours. Okay, it's breaking my heart, and it should break yours. Okay, is it? I don't know, what's happening in other countries that's, maybe many of these people who are fleeing, are they the ones who are leading the worship or against the Lord? Maybe not. We don't know that. Okay. Our responsibility, and even the Jews' responsibility, where He says, let the sojourners stay with you. God doesn't say, listen, give these people like a 50-point test and make sure that they agree with you on every political point. He's just saying, look, just let the sojourner stay with you. Okay, my heart weeps for these people. Okay, so okay, in chapter 17, we're going to start talking about Damascus and the punishment that's going to Damascus, and then we're going to move on to Cush. Again, continuing on with this idea of the different countries that surround Cush, being Egypt, or Damascus being part of Syria, the nation immediately to the north of Israel, Syria, and of course Cush, Egypt, the nation to the far south. These continuing oracles against these countries, showing that God is keeping His promises, that He's protecting Israel, even though their responsibility to be witnesses to these people, to be salt and light, as we would put it from a New Testament perspective, hasn't changed. Okay, so next week we're going to get back into chapter 17. We're going to talk about what happens to Damascus. We're going to talk about what happens to Cush. What's coming up? Then I'm sorry, Cush is not Egypt. Egypt is in verse 19. Again, continuing on Egypt and Cush, and then once again, verse 21. We're going to get back to talking about, or chapter 21. We're going to get back to talking about Babylon. Babylon has fallen. Okay, so thank you very much for being with me here today. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, nobody has a question today. Not like last week, that guy, I don't know, but if you have any questions, by all means, pull me aside at church if you see me, or send me an email, or make a comment in the in the comment on the Facebook page, and I'll be glad to answer it as well as I can. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.